Welcome to episode 1 of I Read X-Men, where that's just what we do. I read X-Men, and so does someone else. And that someone else today is Caitlin. Introduce yourself, Caitlin.
Hi, this is Caitlin.
Thanks for coming all this way.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a really big hike from the couch to right here.
Yeah, because we live here. Okay, so welcome to I Read X-Men, where we're going to explore all of the X-Men comics, starting from number 1, and hopefully we'll get to where they're at right now, and we'll explore and explain all the convoluted history, give you the backstory, and just put our 2 cents in along the way. And on today's episode, on episode 1, we're going to be talking about X-Men number 1 through 5. You ready, Caitlin?
Ready.
All right. Here we go. Okay, we're starting off with X-Men number 1, titled X-Men. This debuted in September of 1963. And I don't know, what were your initial thoughts?
It was good.
Let's start with a little backstory. In this issue, we're introduced to the X-Men. We have Professor X, who is the leader. And then we also have Cyclops, Beast, Angel, Iceman, and Marvel Girl. And just to give you a quick rundown, Professor X is a telepath. He runs his own school, and he starts off kind of as a strict disciplinarian in this comic. And then we have Cyclops, known as Slim Summers in issue 1.
Slim.
Oh, Slimmy. Snap into a Slim Jim. He has an optic blast, and he is the field leader of the X-Men. And then we have Iceman, Bobby Drake, who has ice powers. He's also the class clown, and he's said to be the youngest. And they said he was 16 of this troop of teenagers. The strangest teenagers of all time. Then we have Angel, who's Warren Worthington III. Coolest name so far. He has wings. He can fly. He has
Warren Worthington has wings.
Whoa.
Alliteration.
3 W's. Warren Worthington III. Up next, we have Beast. It's Hank McCoy. He has agility and just basically large hands and feet. And he has kind of strong, super strength, I would say. Yeah, that's Beast pretty much so far. As you'll notice, their characters start to change and evolve as the issues progress. But right now, he's just a dude with some pretty big hands and feet. And super agility, whatever that means. And so this issue kicks off them, training, learning their powers. You get to see a little bit of what they can do. But then Professor X introduces the newest member of the team, which is Marvel Girl. It's Jean Grey, and she has...
Telekinesis.
That's right. Tell the listeners at home what telekinesis is.
You can move objects with your mind.
2 points to Caitlin. We also figured out that mutants, since they have this extra power, that's why Professor X calls them X-Men. He's not vain. He's not calling them X-Men because he's Professor Xavier. It's just that little extra power. So, fun fact.
So I have a question about Bobby Drake.
What's your question?
My question is, maybe I didn't just exactly pick up on it while we were reading, but can he only do his ice power when he is in like snowman form?
No.
Even in these early ones? He doesn't have to like
he doesn't have to
freeze
ice up
up
to use his ice powers, because you see him like in issue 3 coming up. He makes ice cream sundaes, which doesn't really make much sense, but
okay.
yeah, right. The thing with him right now is he doesn't have that much control over his power, so he can really just make fluffy snow.
Okay.
Later it'll become more like ice, but he's more like a snowman now.
Snowman. Okay.
Pretty much.
Then he has to like thaw out. Like it actually looks like it takes him a little bit of time.
Well, yeah, he's developing his power. It's
Okay. All right.
his clothes would be very damp.
True.
Moving on, after we're introduced to our X-Men, we get introduced to the villain.
Ooh.
Because Xavier lets the X-Men know that there's evil mutants out there in the world, and we are introduced to the baddest of the bad, the master of magnetism, Magneto. So basically, he wants to have a show of power to the humans to prove that he's the strongest of all. So he goes to a missile base. He messes up a rocket launch with his magnetic powers at Cape Citadel. And he also causes guns and tanks to move and fire on their own. And then, in his wonderful magnetic fashion, leaves a message in the air, kind of just like in Wizard of Oz,
Pretty much.
that says, "Surrender the base or I'll take it by force." And it's signed Magneto.
I love that he signed it in cursive, though. I like that the message is actually, it's in big, all capital letters, and it's just such a meat surrender. I'll take the, by force.
Even put an exclamation point.
Magneto. I expected it to be like a heart afterwards.
Well, he's got flair. I mean, just look at that. Look at that purple cape. Man knows how to make an entrance.
It does.
And so, after he leaves a message, and they still don't surrender the base, he steps in up a small notch by launching a missile.
As you do.
And then they still don't surrender. So he just decides to walk right into the base and take it by force himself. You've got to make an omelet, break a few eggs. And so he subdues the troops, and then he takes the base. And, of course, the X-Men hear about this happening. And then they,
look at that posed Marvel girl of her in her room thinking about it to herself. She's so posed. Like, ah.
That's right. Whoever designed this uniform could give Christian Dior a run for his money.
Those are some mom shorts there, though.
It was the 60s.
It was the 60s.
So the X-Men, so this isn't the X-Men we know today. They have to hop into a car, drive to an airport, and then take Professor X's private plane, and then, take the plane all the way down to Florida, to Cape Citadel. That's when this of course happens in like 2 or 3 panels, but it's rush to get in your uniforms because we have to take a 3-hour flight or more down to Florida. Then they arrive, and then they're just like, "Hey, Army, let us help." And then they're just like, "Sure, nothing else is working." So, the Army has no other option, so they let the X-Men help because their attacks aren't getting anywhere. So Cyclops tries to blast through the magnetic force field, and then Magneto launches Hunter missiles at the X-Men, which they stop with their powers. Iceman saves the day by freezing the majority of them. And then Magneto, he launches ignited rocket fuel at them, which is it's a pretty mean move. He's ready to kill these guys. But Iceman makes an ice shield, saves everybody. Cyclops blasts the tunnel so they can escape. And then Magneto realizes he must flee, and then he creates a magnetic force field and then flies away. The army then thanks the X-Men, and then they fly back home. End of issue number 1.
It is cool, though, how they actually like the X-Men in this issue. Like the army. I mean, we'll see later on how quickly people start turning on mutants. But right now, mutants are cool.
That's right. They're just crazy superheroes who are helping out.
Yeah.
They have no reason not to trust them.
Nope. Just wait 2 issues.
And that moves us on to issue number 2. No One Can Stop the Vanisher. This one was in November of 1963. And it's a pretty interesting cover. We have the X-Men fighting the Vanisher right in front of the White House. Right on the lawn there.
Ooh.
It's in the sensational Fantastic Four style, Caitlin. They being the big heroes of the day. Things of note in this comic is it's the first appearance of Fred Duncan, who is an FBI contact of Xavier's. It's kind of how they can know of some of these bad guys and whatnot. And it's also the first appearance of the bad guy, the Vanisher. And, of course, his power is he can teleport long ranges. It's just what he does. So, this issue starts with the X-Men racing back to the school to get to Xavier. We don't know why. They're just out about in the city in their costumes, and they're all racing back. Some cool things we learn is that Beast can grip to walls with his feet because he's so agile. And we also learn the school's name. It's Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Another fun fact. And so Xavier shows the X-Men that the Vanisher was out there and he robbed a bank. And so he tells them that they need a new form of training to fight a guy like this. So he introduces them to the Danger Room. So we have the first appearance of the Danger Room in issue number 2. And that's basically like their own little gymnasium. It's where they fight lots of weird things.
Pretty intense gymnasium.
It is a very intense gymnasium. So,
this is one of those things where I always wonder. I want to imagine Xavier's talk with the contractor. Like, I need this room. Hear me out. It's going to have, like, torpedoes in it and things that fly around and all these crazy stuff. Don't ask what it's for. Just build it. Just build it.
well, yeah, you could always hire them and then wipe their minds at the end of the day.
Oh, I guess true.
They could have thought they were just building a nice kitchen nook. But they just just built a giant death trap in a school of teenagers.
Yeah, see, exactly. It sounds weird. But you don't know who they would have told. They could have told other people that, hey, I'm building this really weird thing.
You never know.
Right, you never know.
Xavier works in mysterious ways.
ways.
So after we're introduced to the Danger Room, we see that the Vanisher, he teleports himself right into the middle of the Pentagon. And then in very brash fashion, he just tells people there that he's going to steal their top secret continental defense plans in a few days. Just straight up. He's like, I'm going to steal your stuff. And good luck stopping me.
So full of himself.
And then he just disappears away. And so then all the goons like see his power and they all want to work for him. And, he becomes like a mini kingpin of crime right away with his powers. And so then we find out that Xavier, he's working with Fred Duncan with the FBI in the Department of Special Affairs, and he lets him know about what the Vanisher said he's going to do. So they depart for Washington, D.C. to confront the Vanisher in their new McDonnell XV-1 convertiplane.
Ooh.
So they no longer have the little private jet. They now have a government-issued convertiplane.
Convertiplane.
Which is basically like a helicopter and an airplane and what looks like a
submarine.
A little bit of submarine, and there's skis on the bottom, too, for whenever they need to do a water landing. It's a convertiplane. It's Transformers before Transformers.
It's a multi-purpose plane.
That's right. It's a multiplane. So, cut to the Vanisher. He just pops right in, steals these government plans, and then vanishes away. And so he confronts the X-Men, and then he toys around with them, but then he still ends up leaving with the plans. So, cut to the next day, the newspapers telling right there in black ink that the X-Men were defeated. And this is where the crowds start to turn on them. They have a lot of bad press.
Mm-hmm.
But then the Vanisher, we find out what his real plan is. He wants to blackmail the government for $10 million so they can get their plans back. But then Xavier comes up with his own plan to capture the Vanisher, and it results with a confrontation on the lawn of the White House. So before the fight, Xavier appears, and then what do you think he does? Remember what he does?
I don't.
He just shuts down the Vanisher by making him...
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. We're already at the end. Yeah, he makes him forget. He totally wipes out his memory.
Yeah, that's Xavier's signature move for a lot of these. He's just like, oh, you want to fight? Guess what? Who are you?
Yeah.
I don't remember. Oh, then you must be going then. And then,
Same thing he did to the contractor.
Exactly. That's like his go-to move.
It is.
Is just mind-wiping people. Instant amnesia. And so... then all the thugs that the Vanisher had there realize their meal ticket's gone, and so they, of course, attack the X-Men. But the X-Men defeat them, saving the day, bringing to a close issue number 2, which then moves us on to the next one in our series, X-Men number 3, Beware the Blob, which was in January of 1964.
Nothing moves the Blob.
And looking at the cover, yes, we have to beware the Blob. the teenage superheroes who have taken America by storm.
Whoa.
It's 24 pages of thrills. Let's find out what is so thrilling, shall we?
Shall.
Of course, much like all the rest of these, it starts with the X-Men in a training session in their danger room. And then Xavier interrupts their training session to inform them that he has mentally detected a mutant nearby. So he sends the X-Men out. He's like, get in your civilian clothes, and then you're going to go out and find this mutant. It's somewhere out there. And so this note's the first time that Cyclops' name is given as Scott.
Oh, yeah.
He's Scott Summers now. He's no longer Slim Summers. That's just kind of his nickname. And we also find out that his optic blast is uncontrollable. And it's also kind of a reason for his gloominess. In this one, all the characters have kind of gotten a little bit more character traits. And Cyclops is very moody.
He is moody.
And
he's kind of a Debbie Downer.
Iceman is definitely the class clown.
Yep.
And Beast, his vocabulary has definitely increased. We realize he's much more of an intellectual. In the first issue, he's kind of more of a brute.
Yep.
But they kind of changed it now, so he's the smarty pants, and of course, Angel is the ladies' man.
Ladies' man.
So
we also find out something else very important in this issue.
this is very true.
Dun dun dun.
Well, first we find out that Cyclops likes Jean Grey, but he's afraid to love because of his uncontrollable power. But on that same token, we find out that Xavier has some affection for Jean too, because he thinks of her as, quote, the one he loves.
Ugh.
This is write this down, put it in the back of your mind, because this will come into play much, much later in the Onslaught storyline in the future. So I'm sure we'll reference back to this point. But
do we ever find out how old Xavier is right now?
Not really. But, I mean...
But she's like 17, maybe 18, because we find out that Bobby's the youngest at 16.
Yeah. You have to think that they're... Well, I mean, they could be 16 too. He's just the youngest of the 16.
Oh, okay. That makes it worse.
They keep changing it too. It's a sliding scale of Marvel ages. So I always imagined Xavier was like at the youngest late 20s, like 29ers at the youngest. But I mean, maybe early 30s around this time. But of course, in the 50s, they could have always imagined him as a 40-year-old guy.
It's getting worse. It's not getting better.
Well,
it's getting worse.
I didn't write it.
I know, but I'm just saying.
This is a good time to say this. We get to blame Stan Lee for the first 5 issues. Not blame, but he wrote Stan Lee wrote all of the first 5 issues, and all these were drawn by Jack Kirby, which is some wonderful artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but moving on from this crazy love triangle.
Ooh, what a triangle.
That is never really talked of ever again.
Weird scalene triangle. With Xavier way over here and the other two over there.
So the X-Men are going out trying to find this mutant, and lo and behold, Cyclops wanders to the circus, because in the 60s there seemed to be always a circus somewhere on the outskirts of town.
Yeah.
And he finds Fred Dukes, a.k.a. the Blob. And he has power over his mass. He has an indestructible body, and he has super strength. So
Sorry, there's a crazy, I don't know if you noticed, I just realized this, but there is, in these 3 issues, a crazy villain color scheme. Every villain so far has had red and purple. I just noticed the Blob has a red and purple cape. And the Vanisher had a weird red and purple costume, and of course Magneto, his characteristic red and purple.
Well, yeah, I mean, you gotta. The X-Men costumes are blue and gold, so it's you need a contrast, I guess, for the.
Well, I know. Yeah, I'm just saying. It's just interesting. I guess I just realized that all of them have that. Oh.
It's
the color of villainy.
It is, and so they find out that the Blob is a mutant because they actually shoot a gun at him. And people are like, "Oh, you just shot blanks." And then, closer look, you see that the shells of all the bullets are stuck in his skin, and then he just flexes, and then they just all bounce out and pop onto the floor. So Cyclops is just like, hey, come to this school. We want, you're a mutant. We want to teach you how to use your powers. And he's like, no way, man. But then Jean Grey comes in, and it's just like, hey, I'm at this school too. And he's like, okay, I'll go.
Oh, it's become a love square.
That's right. And so they invite Blob back to the school so that Xavier can test his powers. And then Xavier even invites the Blob to join the X-Men. But the Blob is just like, no way. I'm not down for this. So it's time for that signature move. Xavier tries to mind wipe the Blob, but the Blob escapes before he can do that. So you have to question, who's the real villain here? But later, Blob makes it back to his circus, and he is emboldened by the fact that he is now Homo Superior, the mutant. And he takes over his carnival, and then he gets everybody together and brings them back to the school.
Like the giraffe.
Yeah, and all of a sudden there's giraffes, there's guys with ladders, there's strong men, there's elephants, and they just start attacking the school. Just because, why not? And so the X-Men hold them off long enough for Professor X to use his newly manufactured electric mass influencer to not just erase one person's mind, but it increases his power so he can erase everybody in the carnival's memories. And so then they all return to their lives at the carnival, and that is how the X-Men save the day in episode 3. Or in issue 3. It's pretty crazy. And then that moves us on to issue number 4, The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which was published in March of 1964. Featuring the return of the dreaded Magneto. It's the most unusual teenagers of all time again.
At last, we face the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants.
I know, it's a pretty dynamic cover where we're going to be introduced to some new characters. So this issue starts off with the X-Men, of course, in the Danger Room again, doing their training thing. Marvel Girl is given the task of lifting a lid from a box using her telekinesis. And once it's open, you find out that it's a birthday cake inside. Look at that. Professor X isn't such a dick.
He's just trying to hit on her.
Well, we figure out it's been exactly 1 year since the team was formed. So he's just like, let's celebrate with some cake. And the thing I love is that they cut the cake with Cyclops' optic blast. That's a new use for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we are introduced to the Brotherhood that is led by Magneto. And, of course, they are quite the opposite. They're a bickering team of supervillains, and they are consisted of Toad, Mortimer Toynbee, who has a super leaping ability. And we have Mastermind, Jason Wingard, who can cast illusions. He's an illusionist, Caitlin, an illusionist. Then we have Quicksilver, who's Pietro Maximoff. He has super speed. And the Scarlet Witch, who is Wanda Maximoff, Quicksilver's sister, and she has a hex power. Just kind of tilts probabilities, so like if there's a wall and she throws a hex bolt at it, it's a good chance the wall's going to come tumbling down.
But she has no control.
Not really. No control at this point
Okay.
whatsoever. So we find out that Magneto has been up to no good. He stole a freighter, and he returns it to his secret headquarters somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. And then we also learned that he is kind of coaxed Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch to work for him. We found out that there was an angry mob who wanted to kill her for burning down a barn with her mutant powers, and she and Quicksilver are now in his debt for saving their lives from this evil town. And so, but back to that freighter that Magneto stole. We found out that he uses that stolen freighter to attack a small island nation of Santa Marco in South America. Looks like Magneto's getting some real estate.
Moving on up.
And then Professor X learns about this, of course, by reading the newspaper. That's how everybody learned about everything back in the day. children. We used to print everything on pieces of paper and then distribute them in the morning instead of showing up on your smartphone. So he learns about the attack, and then he contacts Magneto on the astral plane.
Ooh,
Which
first
is,
time on the astral
yeah,
plane.
first reference of the astral plane. So he kind of sends his astral self out, and he has a little chat with Magneto, and they have it's not really a chat. They have a dispute. We find out that Xavier believes that humans and mutants should coexist with one another, but Magneto, on the other hand, believes that Homo superior is just that, superior to Homo sapiens, regular humans, and that the mutants should rule the world. So after that conversation, we find out that Xavier is going to come after Magneto, and then Magneto just did what he promised. He takes over the small island nation. Mastermind creates an imaginary army, and he frightens all of the people of Santa Marco. So they basically just give up the island to him.
Just waltz right in
That's
with
right.
imaginary people.
And so this is the thing I love the most about this is Professor X and the X-Men travel to Santa Marco using an alias that it's an American professor and his students on a goodwill mission. So, they're just like, hey, we're here from America. We're goodwill students. Well, you just took over this island nation, but yeah, we'll let you in anyway.
Yeah.
And so the once in the country, they don their outfits and they go for the attack. So once they go attack Magneto, they run in with his soldiers. They run in with Toad and Mastermind, and then it gets to a big conflict at the end, and then Magneto has set up 2 traps. He has a booby trap door to stop the X-Men from following him, but he also has a nuclear bomb that he has set up to blow up the entire nation. So basically, if he can't have this island, nobody's going to have this island. Yeah, so he has this booby trap door, and so Beast is going for it, but Professor X senses the danger, and then he hurls himself in front of this door, and to protect the X-Men, and it triggers the bomb. And so the Brotherhood escape. I think they have like a little slide that they go down to get to whatever ship they're escaping through. But then Quicksilver runs back. He disarms the second bomb intended to destroy the island nation because he couldn't let innocents die. He doesn't want any
He has a moral compass.
he doesn't want to murder anybody.
He's not a murderer.
So, in the end, Professor X regains consciousness only to inform the X-Men that, dun dun dun, his telepathic powers have been deadened by the explosion. So the X-Men are left questioning whether they're strong enough to continue on without the Professor, which then leads us into our last issue of this podcast, X-Men number 5, Trapped, One X-Man, which was published in May of 1964. So the X-Men, this takes place directly after the last issue. The X-Men return home with the injured Professor X, and the X-Men ponder what they're going to do with the Professor when they hear that Marvel Girl's parents are arriving for a surprise visit. So they change into their civilian clothes, and then they greet Jean Grey's parents. So this is also the first appearance of John and Elaine Grey, the parents of Marvel Girl. So they excuse the Professor X's absence, and they give Jean Grey's parents a tour of the mansion, as you do. And then as they head into the danger room, Hank McCoy explains that it's their gym, and they're in the process of receiving new equipment because, when it's not in action, the danger room just looks like a giant empty room because everything's hidden behind the walls.
In the floors.
Yeah, so in true X-Men fashion, Cyclops gets locked into the danger room, and then it triggers Beast's training program. So he escapes by basically destroying everything in the room with his optic blasts, and at the end he's like, "Oh, good thing that room is soundproof, or else they would have known something was up."
Yeah.
So Jean Grey's parents leave, and then we see a cloaked figure walking outside the mansion, and it's Mastermind. He's out searching for the X-Men's headquarters, but if only he knew he was so close yet so far. So he calls Magneto to pick him up on his little
iPhone.
Uh,
His,
it-
his
it-
Apple Watch.
what looks like an Apple Watch, and
Ahead of his time.
then a little plane comes and takes him to the first appearance of Asteroid M,
Ooh.
Magneto's orbital base, and that little magnetic plane.
He's Magneto in space.
I don't think people knew how magnets worked back in the 60s.
They had to.
Well, not as well as we know today. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. I mean, they got people in space. I'm in the 60s. I'm sure they knew how a magnet worked.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying maybe Stan Lee didn't. Just saying because it's, we're using this plane powered by magnets to go into space.
Well, true. We're also talking about superheroes with mutant powers, so
That's very true. Thank you for bringing me down to earth.
anything is possible.
Up at Asteroid M, Magneto is lamenting to his Brotherhood that as long as the X-Men are around, they're going to intervene and ruin all his plans for mutant domination.
Wah, wah.
But he's also devised a new plan to trick them. So I'm sure we're going to find out what that is soon. But we go back to the X-Men, and we see that, it's just a normal Sunday. They're just watching a track meet on the TV.
Except for Scott, who's in his room crying.
That's right. And of course,
like usual.
he slams the door like a moody
Right.
teenager
Yep.
with his optic
With
blast.
his optic blast.
As you do. But they see a contestant at this track meet who is leaping and jumping, and the crowd turns angry on him because everyone thinks that he's cheating. But the X-Men know, hey, that guy's a mutant, and we've got to go out there and help him. So they go and rescue him, and they escape the crowd by hopping on the subway, which, only in New York. And they realize that the mutant is wearing a mask, and then they take the mask off, and they're like, "Uh-oh, it's Toad."
It's Toad.
Of course, they should have known that from the beginning. The X-Men start fighting Toad, and then as they do that, all of a sudden you see, they're still on the subway. It almost looks like they're in Grand Central Station. Would
Sure.
you say?
Sure. Would make sense.
I don't know. Remember they're in New York. And you see the metal clocks and everything start going crazy. And Magneto and his Brotherhood have arrived. So they start attacking the X-Men, and then Magneto captures Angel, and he leaves Toad captured with the X-Men. So Magneto takes Angel back up to Asteroid M via yet another type of magnetic plane. This one actually looks like a magnetic horseshoe
Giant
shape.
magnet.
As you do. It repels away from the Earth. That's how it flies. So Magneto starts to interrogate Angel because he wants to find out the location of the X-Men's secret headquarters. But Angel refuses to tell him. Then Magneto tries to brainwash Angel by basically leaving him in a room that has a bunch of strobe lights, loud music, and just tries to make him go crazy. Not enough room to fly around. So then the X-Men, they have to decide what to do with Toad. But Toad starts to act very strange. It's like he falls into a trance. His only thoughts are to return to Magneto, and then he has like this, what kind of looks like a little anklet tracking device on him. So iPhone for the ankle. And he presses it, which then calls one of the magnetic shuttles from Asteroid M down to his location. So the X-Men hop in and ride it back up to Asteroid M. So when they arrive there, they surprise the Brotherhood and then start attacking them. But then Magneto puts on a piece of equipment, and then he makes all the metal in the asteroid come alive to attack the X-Men. So he's about to trap them, and then it looks like he's going to blow them out of an airlock when the Council is sabotaged by the Scarlet Witch's hex power, because just like her brother, she can't tolerate murder. So Magneto and the two siblings argue over their loyalties, giving the X-Men enough time to free the Angel from his little torture chamber, and then they just go on the attack. The fighting causes the asteroid to start to fall apart, start to rip in two, And then Magneto hurls Cyclops into a section of the asteroid that's breaking off into space. So before he gets trapped out in the nothingness of space, Iceman creates an ice tunnel to hold the two pieces of asteroid together. And Angel flies through it and rescues Cyclops. And then very quickly, the issue wraps up with the X-Men finding an escape capsule and returning to Earth. And then the X-Men return to the mansion and tell Professor X what occurred. But then he says that he already knew. And of course, surprise, surprise, that strict disciplinarian Professor Xavier, we find out that he didn't lose his telepathy. It was all an elaborate ruse. He used this situation as their final exam.
Such a jerk.
Professor Xavier's a jerk.
Final exam. More like, I just wanted someone to take care of me for a couple days.
Well, at least they all passed.
Oh, good.
And he let them know that their training is over.
Oh, okay.
So...
Can't cry wolf, Professor Xavier. Next time you lose your powers, I don't think they'll be buying it.
I know. I love how quickly the events of the whole comic are wrapped up in the last 3 panels.
Yeah.
It was all a ruse. I'm fine.
Oh, good.
But that's it. And we have an editor's note at the end of this one. It says, now that their training is ended, even greater dangers await them, for the strange saga of the X-Men is just beginning. Stan and Jack have a million surprises in store for you, so be with us next-ish. See you then. And we hope that you join us for our next episode where we cover X-Men number 6 through 10. And hope you enjoyed it. And for I Read X-Men, this has been Randy.
And Caitlin.
You can catch us on Twitter at I Read X-Men. And also look out for new episodes on our Silent Flick YouTube page. Until that time, we'll keep reading X-Men and telling you all about it. Bye.
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 Bye.